Now it's just gonna run, and then it'll just give me a shout when you want to go to the video, and then I'll just come back and do the crossover. It'll be
Thank you, everyone. Welcome. Hi, thank you. Just the heater on. Are the heaters on? No, I thought maybe that one. I want to turn them off. Thanks, everyone. A very warm welcome to everyone. I'm Rosie. Welcome to the Soil, Soul and Society series. Please, if you can take a moment just to check your phone is turned off. If you need the bathrooms, the men's just upstairs on the right and the women's are down the end. Just before I introduce Mark, I'd like to welcome Jess, Director of the SI.
Hi guys, so I just wanted to say a warm welcome and use the opportunity to have some new faces and some very old faces. Welcome back, and hopefully, our students and everyone who's here with us, to say thank you to Mark for this evening, but I think a great reminder for us to switch our phones off, or onto silent. I think really wonderful for us to come through when this first, this is a much older idea, so the Soil, Soul and Society series had been running a few years ago. We restarted it a few months ago, and Mark has brought in incredible speakers, but it's fantastic for us to have him here this evening as well. And you'll notice as you come through the building, we're actually starting to host a number of different kinds of events. So I just wanted to use a 2-minute window to say we'd really love to welcome you to these kinds of events. Please bring your friends and your family. But we're also hosting a number of workshops in the coming weeks. So we have Mish and Flora with us in a residency, so our first residency we've hosted in a long time. And there's fantastic hands-on workshops around food rituals, composting, beekeeping, a bunch of fun stuff. You obviously know our modules and our courses. And the one small thing I wanted to do a big welcome to was our Spring Festival that we'll be hosting in September. So it's our way of celebrating a changing of the seasons and the wonderful community that we get to work with. So there'll be music, poiki course, all kinds of stuff happening, working with our children and youth programs. So often people only see a part of the SI, which is the Masters and the PhD, but we do a lot of work with children, with farming, with celebrating soils and all kinds of things. So it's another way of bringing the Soil, Soul and Society alive. And I really hope we'll see you and your families at the Spring Festival. So we'll be sending that out, but it's on the 11th of September, and there's a bunch of posters around as well. And a big thanks to Mark. We're looking really forward to I think bringing much more creative sharing of the kinds of work that's happening and causes for optimism. So I hope I wasn't off when we wrote the small intro about what Mark will be sharing from his few months of traveling and all the different places where he's been working and doing really interesting research. But I think in so many conferences and so much work, and something I came back from today, often left with the sense of it's easy to talk about everything that's not working, and I think the real hard work is to be part of building what is working and what we want to be a part of doing together. So thank you very much, and thanks to Rosie for organizing.
So just a very brief introduction to Mark, who needs no introduction to most of us. He's just returned a week and a half ago from his second sabbatical in his career.
That's nothing to boast about.
Very short by most sabbatical standards, but the 3 months that he has just come back from is the longest he's actually been out of South Africa as well. He's had an amazing set of journeys, and he's exposed to a lot of cutting-edge trends, which he's very kindly offered to share with us tonight. So, no more ado, thanks a lot.
Consistent with tradition, Sustainability Institute. It's necessary on an occasion like this to invoke the words of Ben Okri. Now I know who's in the room. And the poem is Heraclitus' Golden River, which I think is appropriate for the message that I hope to weave, but that I have yet to weave the message. It's going to happen as we talk. So it goes like this: change is good, but no change is better. The words rang through the great hall as they resounded silently through bygone ages. The air is drier where no change is better. Old ways kept old, protected from the devils at the gate, stiffen the mind's luminous dance. Change is a god that Heraclitus sought in the ancient river. As we keep things the same, the river works beneath us. The god works ironies on our lives. The river runs. Fields unfurl strange new mushrooms. Libraries yield new books in the charged margins of the old. And reason, trapped in iron philosophies, turns on itself and prowls the diminished boundaries of a shrinking world. So before I take you through this, just some acknowledgement. Firstly to the Sustainability Institute for setting this up and valuing the work that I have been part of, and for the amazing transformation that has taken place and the gathering of a lot of the spirits and networks that make this place so magical. The second is to Stellenbosch University for providing me with funding and time away, and to the Centre for Complex Systems in Transition, to Yanni, who's here, for creating the space, to Utrecht University, that funded my time in the Netherlands, Sheffield University, who funded my time in the UK, as well as the University of Coventry, as a result of the introduction made possible by Mish and Flora, who facilitated during their visit earlier this year the connection that I'll be talking about in a lot more detail. So thanks to them. So I'm going to show some pictures, tell stories of the discussions, the meetings, the interactions along the way. But it's very much in the context of a search that I really set myself as I was in preparation for leaving. And this search really is a kind of matrix of ideas. The one dimension is the search for deeper understanding of what the global transition that everyone seems to be talking about means. What are the dynamics, and in particular, what's the nexus between the search for a new economics and the search for a more sustainable world? And I was very conscious that I was coming back, and on my third day back in South Africa, I would be teaching a brand new course on alternative economics. And some of the people who participated in that course were there. And I was interested in how this nexus between the global transition and new economics connects with the extraordinary creativity mushrooming across the world in cities and urban settlements. In the absence of a global agreement on how to solve the economic crisis, there has been no Bretton Woods conference, as happened after the Second World War, but rooted really in attempts to resolve the crisis triggered by the 1929 crash. There's been no economic summit. There has been no real significant global agreement on climate change. What we have from last year is the Sustainable Development Goals. And the practice of actual transition I see mushrooming in urban experiments around the world. making sense of urban experimentation as a force for transformative change was really the deepest part of in a sense, the search that I set for myself. And part of that is raising the question that I posed wherever I went: can experimentation become the new mode of governance? Is possibly what we are seeing emerging, or what we can't really see emerging because of the lenses that we use to look for answers, is what we are seeing emerging in these mushrooming of experimentations in cities around the world, in some way providing glimpses of the future. But to use the phrase from Dave Snowden, the evolutionary potential of the present, as opposed to scenario building and reverse engineering backwards. So what's the evolutionary potential of the present? And that's really the framework of thinking. And I arrived in Rotterdam and I was told to go to a hotel, which turns out to be a ship. And it's an interesting story, this ship. This is the ship that took hundreds of thousands of very poor Dutch people after the Second World War to the United States, to the free world, out of a war-ravaged, destroyed Europe. It was a ship of hope. And a Dutch millionaire decided not so long ago to find out what happened to it, and discovered it was in a scrapyard in Brazil. Bought it and got it refurbished, heavily overcommitted himself, and somehow convinced the state to take it over. And therein lies another story, which is the role of the state as the kicker-upper of risk at this time when we like to vilify it as an institution. And the place that my whole sabbatical was really stitched together around a constant set of returns to this place, the International Architecture Biennale Rotterdam, the IABR, which is an architectural biennale that takes place every 2 years in Rotterdam, funded by the Rotterdam City and other funders. And they use the exhibition to revitalize derelict neighborhoods because of the massive throughput of people that takes place. So this was in a derelict kind of building that had been rehabilitated. And the curator of the exhibition for this year was Martin Meyer, a friend of mine, a professor of political science, written books about sustainability, had spent 4 years as head of the Netherlands Environment Agency, and his term came to an end, coinciding with his transition to the University of Utrecht University, where he's setting up something called the Urban Futures Studio. Again, concerned with trying to make sense of urban experimentation. And he used his curatorship of the IABR to kind of set the stage for his kind of public discourse on urban futures. And he invited me to be an advisor to him as a curator, and together with Edgar Peterson and Tao Kavenga to curate for the first time an African exhibition, as a set of African exhibits inside of the Rotterdam Biennale. So we have 19 exhibits of various African initiatives, and I don't have time to go into all of them. At the bottom of the space, a kind of food mall, alternative kind of food mall emerged, and the catalogue, which is available, contained an essay that I wrote, which tried to capture the essence of the message that I started off this talk with, the spirit of Ben Okri and this search to make sense of urban experimentation in a world in global crisis. And I think this quote, "The future is already here, it is just not evenly distributed," kind of captures the dynamics of the discussion. It's, yes, the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed, but nor is the discussion about the future evenly distributed. And I think that's really what Edgar Peterson, Tartavega, and I were trying to do, is rectify this imbalance. This is Martin Heyer, and we worked together in curating quite a number of workshops and discussions during the course of the Biennale. But as I walked in, I was confronted with this picture emblazoned on the wall, which is Nkahini, an informal settlement in Stellenbosch. Because one of the exhibits at the Rotterdam Biennale is the iShack project, the social enterprise that the Sustainability Institute initiated based on research into how to use renewable energy technologies and ecological design in the upgrading of informal settlements here in Stellenbosch. This is the iShack exhibit. What was interesting about this exhibition is the way it was laid out. So just to, these are some of the posters that we prepared as background to a 10-minute documentary, which was a collage of a multiplicity of images. About 125 different clips were collated. But these were the posters that we prepared with this powerful message that Africa is not a country. And once you're putting Africa into the global discourse, especially when you are pigeonholed as now, coming from Africa, I mean, it's like talking about Africa as if it's a place, and constantly pushing that back into people's faces and saying, well, actually, it's all of these pieces. Yes, it's urbanizing fast. It's 61% of urbanites live in informal settlements, and well, we're going to have to find innovative solutions, because what you see mushrooming across the African continent, and it was a big theme of many of my talks, is the third uprising, the third African uprising, third wave of uprising. The first wave got rid of colonialism in the 50s and 60s. The second wave got rid of the dictatorships in the 80s and 90s. And now we're into the third wave. And we're not quite sure what it's going to get rid of. Because you never know what's going to happen in Africa tomorrow. Even if it was a place. So what is, to contrast that with an exhibit that just constantly got drawn back to, because it kept on astounding me. And this is an exhibit about the problem of cycling in Utrecht. And Utrecht has got a problem. It's got cycle jams. If only. If only we had this problem. If only that was our problem. So it was, the cycle garage at Utrecht Station has got 4,000 bicycles in it, and it's full. And the engineering company that put this exhibit together, in all the deepest and most frank, typically Dutch kind of earnestness, talks seriously and in a very, very committed way about their discovery that the real problem when it comes to cycle management is that everybody assumes that you need more cycle lanes if you want to solve the problem of cycle congestion in a city. But that's not the problem. The problem is the intersections. And if you could make the intersections work better, then you'll get a much easier flow of cycles. You know, it's like half an hour later you get to this profound point. If only I could have a problem like this. So, the amazing thing about this exhibition was its simplicity. Everything was on tables this high that were made purpose-built tables, and it had this remarkable effect on you. As you're looking down, there's this is an exhibit on gentrification and how you go beyond gentrification, and it's got more text than most exhibits, but most of it has very minimalist text. So you're really kind of trying to engage with the images. You're trying to read the text, and you're looking up and you're seeing everybody else doing the same thing, and you're hearing everybody else talking. And they had a very clever strategy of not allowing exhibits to have soundtracks. There's kind of silence and a buzz and a hubbub in this renovated derelict space where you are looking into the future through a multiplicity of eyes. I spent a lot of time here, and I probably covered 50% of the exhibit. So all sorts, from China to the African exhibits, to Latin American exhibits, obviously lots of European exhibits. And I like this one, which was all about redirecting finance into the real economy, part of my search for an alternative economics. These were some Brazilian colleagues who have been doing very similar work to us in upgrading of informal settlements. They're both architects. And this is Martin Heyer's PEP project, which is a massive, massive atlas of the North Sea and the surrounding coast of the UK, the Netherlands, and the Scandinavian countries. And he commissioned the building of a digital atlas that rehearsed the possibility of building a renewable energy power plants, windmills, solar power plants across the kind of this North Sea rim to create, by 2038, a new power grid that would facilitate the transition to renewable energy. And he got cabinet ministers and decision makers around, and in visual form, they had a discussion narrated in visual form, in kind of real-time pushed forward into the possibilities of what could be done through greater collaboration. This is my colleague Tao Tavenga at one of the sessions. Tao is a Zimbabwean who's been living in South Africa for a very long time, working with Edgar in crafting a whole range of amazingly creative products, including the magazine Cityscapes. And on his way out, he was told he's not allowed to come back in because there's something wrong with his visa. So he's still circling around somewhere in the world, unable to get back home. And he is married, recently married. So to move on a bit, Martin took me on a drive through the reclaimed parts of the Netherlands, which is most of it. And it's not very difficult to drive through most of the Netherlands because it's so small. But he took me to a remarkable, one of his great pet loves is to identify iconic buildings. And this was a waterworks that was taken over by an entrepreneur and converted into a 5-star hotel. And this is the restaurant, which is permanently full, and this is where they used to treat the sewage. So this is the same person who bought this building, which is the Hotel New York, which is across the water from where the Rotterdam Biennale was taking place. And this is where the ship used to stop to pick up the poor Dutch people who were making the journey across the Atlantic to the United States. That's hence the name, the Hotel New York. This was a derelict building, like the waterworks before, and the same entrepreneur bought that building for €1 because the estate didn't know what to do with it. And he converted it into one of the most successful hotels in Rotterdam, an exceptionally beautifully crafted building that really is testimony to what is possible with extraordinary vision which nobody has. Nobody else shares, or nobody else has. And when you do it, when you make it, when you build it, they come and play. That's another picture from the balcony of the Biennale.
So the talk that I gave, there was Martin invited a series of speakers to do what he called next talks, and I gave the first next talk, and it was on planetary urbanism and the evolutionary potential of the present, where I tried to map out, without the support of a PowerPoint presentation, a storyline, a discourse for shaping the conversations that Mark and I are going to host in the subsequent months around this intersection between the global economic transition, the global sustainability transition, and the dynamics of the experimentation taking place in cities. And I tried to articulate a story around a way in which we could understand the interactions between these different transitionary dynamics. One of Martin's introduction at the beginning, the opening of the exhibition, which was captured in this kind of animated artistic representation here, was really that we're facing quite a unique situation. Everybody agrees that fundamental change is necessary. Across the board, the phrase structural transformation is used. The IMF, the OECD, the World Economic Forum, right through to more radical social movements and networks. Structural transformation. In the past, we have assumed that structural transformation takes place in one way or another by means of action by the state, in particular a nation state, either captured and transformed from below through revolution, or destroyed and reconstructed through warfare, or through democratic transitions that's swept across Latin America and Southern Europe and Eastern Europe since the 1970s. But today, we face a challenge that the levels of complexity, the levels of globalized interconnectedness, the pace of change seems to have resulted in a diminution of the capacity of the state to actually be effective. And so we have to look for motive forces of transformation beyond our traditional assumptions about how we deal with fundamental change, structural transformation. And it's in that context that he refers to, and has written a little booklet about, the energetic society. The notion that there are forces at play that are filling this vacuum, creating networks and coalitions, and learning, and what he calls globally networked urbanism, the relationships forming between cities, that is resulting in a new dynamic at play. Precisely what it is, how it's going to work out, and hark back to my imagery of the third wave of African uprisings giving rise to questions. Martin and I have this incredible relationship. It's deeply, deeply rooted in a European discourse. I'm deeply rooted in an African discourse. And yet we think about very similar things, looking for dynamics of change in very similar places without giving up on the necessity to think about the state, but without assuming that it's the most important locus of power. Edgar Peterson, in his talk, he also did a next talk, a keynote next talk, a couple of weeks after me, on the African challenge, focusing on Edgar's favorite topic, informalism, slum urbanism, and what's happening in African cities. And the possibility that maybe in African cities, where the key to survival is to learn, unlearn, and relearn in a blink of an eye, that maybe there's a new kind of person emerging in these spaces where time and space have not been institutionalized and routinized through overregulation. Maybe in those spaces there's life, there's an energy, there's a set of imaginations that are not captured and are able to resist the shrinking world that Ben Akri talks about. And so Edgar talks about a multiplicity of modes of engagement. The philosopher that historicizes, the artist that curates, the hackers that rewire, the designers that look for resonance or a kind of radical pragmatism, and the bureaucrat who is the institutional experiment. We need to be all these things, he says. Tall order, easy to say. Edgar can probably do it. So one of the workshops that that Martin and I facilitated was with change makers. We actually use the word change agent, but nobody likes that word. So I prefer Vanessa. The SI is a change makers program. And this is summing up at the end of this workshop of extraordinary change makers from around the world, all of whom are deeply rooted in practice, desperately want to connect their extraordinary experiments to the financial circuits of the world. But the people who run the financial systems, who also participated in the workshop, don't know how to disconnect their quarterly reporting and their focus on deploying finance in finance rather than in the real economy. So it was an extraordinary discussion of connecting financial flows and urban experimentation. And unless that happens, there really isn't much hope. It has to happen on a very large scale. And one of the people who is doing this is this extraordinary and quite unlikely looking character who took our group on a tour of a probably a 10 by 10 block piece of Amsterdam, which is being redeveloped through an extraordinary partnership between the city of Amsterdam, private sector and local civic groups of which he's a part, to really substantially reinvent this rather derelict space and create, yes, space for gentrification, entry of the middle class, but also the stabilization of environments for poorer people, all with very, very, very advanced ecological design systems, including something I've dreamed about for a long time, a local sewage treatment plant based on vacuum technology. So you vacuum out the sewage into a treatment system, separate it out, and harness all the resources. So these are some of the buildings, multi-story, relatively high-density buildings and spaces that are being constructed in the space. We also visited these young people who are part of a social movement who are resisting eviction from the rented housing that they occupy, social housing that they occupy, which the state now wants to sell to a private developer, resisting gentrification. And a couple of us who have social movement experience from the developing world, I think had some useful advice for that. Then we visited a pop-up city, which is really just literally a little city that's been constructed through various temporary fabrications as an exhibit of alternative settlement design. Pop-up has become a kind of byword amongst the kind of trendy design literati for kind of valuing the impermanent in a context of very fast changing systems where stability or permanence seems to be a contradiction in terms. So it's a kind of a new discourse in the design in the design language. And some very, very old technology used extremely wisely. For South Africans, we really need to recognize how much life can happen on a bicycle. And maybe the Utrecht engineers have a point. These small things do matter when we dream about the big, big transition. And so this is my favorite picture from the 3 months. Some of you are in the room here. Some of the students from our master's program came to Rotterdam and spent a week with us at the exhibition. So Oliver's here somewhere. Yeah, so, yeah, a couple of people are here, and it just, for me, represents, if you like, Martin and I in our 50s, and the next generation. What are they going to make of this peek into the future, into this glimpse? How are they going to interpret the evolutionary potential of the present? Because one thing's for sure, a couple of aging white males are not going to have much of a monopoly on what that looks like. And so here's a picture of them in the looking at a virtual reality depiction of the future as constructed by the information technology companies. So the companies with the greatest, the institutions with the greatest resources in the world today to kind of manufacture the future are the information technology companies. The world, according to Siemens, is a world that has got extraordinary resources behind it. And this is just a kind of virtual reality imaging of what that could look like. And after you've seen this, there's a curtain that you walk through and you move into the exhibition. The exhibition that celebrates the messiness, the richness, the complexity, everything that is not in the story that Siemens sells. And so here we are, our South African students and the Dutch students beginning their collaboration. And this is one of the exhibits where you have to lie on your back and look at the exhibit. And this is two of the people here in the room going through the motions. And this is on a bicycle, on a tandem, which was necessary for a cycling tour through Amsterdam, and this was our last night together. I thought I'd show you where I stayed that week, which was on a boat. I don't know how this is going to work. Yeah. Okay. So it's like one of these barges that you can get through Airbnb. So that tells another story. And being a boy at heart, gadgets are obviously very important to me. But I have a son who's 23 on Friday, and we share an obsession with gadgets like this: electric cycles. The extraordinary work that's happening in Rotterdam around densification, multi-story, social mix, which for me, Rotterdam is interesting. Amsterdam has become touristified. Rotterdam is seen as like the city of the workers. And at the launch, at the exhibition, a new generation of younger intellectuals launched this, the Center for Public Imagination. And what they define as the kind of imagination that we need for a world in transition is imagination that goes against the grain. And it means developing the capacity for digging, for traveling, for locating, for performing and distributing. And I just love those fresh and new worlds. So this is Martin and I at the end of the exhibition in a closing interview. So I want to move on to Utrecht and some of my favorite spaces where I like to write and a statue of Anne Frank. And a place that I've wanted to visit for a very long time, an ecologically designed suburb called Lady Lane, 30,000 households. I've talked about in class, and I've managed to drive my bicycle around and see it firsthand. It's kind of, the real world is much less interesting than what we imagine it to be. Especially a Dutch suburb. This is interesting. New parking lots with electrical connections where you charge your 100% electric vehicle. And then I went to a really important exhibition in Utrecht called Hacking Habitat. And it's worth reading this. Our society is increasingly in the grip of technology. How far does the control of high-tech networks go? Far, as shown in Hacking Habitat. High-tech systems and institutes take charge. Smartphones have become spy phones with data combinations that establish your identity more exactly than a fingerprint. Surveillance and listening devices are hidden in thermostats and packaging material. Facebook directs our social life, and Google sends you without hesitation to the next purchase. Algorithms control not only financial transactions, but also decide about our digital citizenship. High time to claim back our environment, to hack our habitat. Hacking Habitat provides a series of awareness, A-awareness, A-awareness, with 3 filters. And they go through it. And then they say, counter-strikes is the 4th filter, and meanders through all spaces. Artists, ethical hackers, and pressure groups make the remote control tangible and know how to use the technology to our advantage. And it was an extraordinary experience to go through this. And this was an exhibit set up by an artist to replicate in miniature the smart technologies that monitor everything that's going on in the City of London. And it's known as the Nemesis machine. And the Nemesis machine is a miniature city that shows the current data flow from the smart city London, including input from sensors, surveillance, and cameras, and data from traffic information and environmental monitoring systems. The work responds to the light, sound, temperature, and air pressure of London itself. If something happens there, it's registered directly in miniature here in Utrecht. The Nemesis machine is like London's avatar, powered by the real city in real time. Powered by the city, powered by, in algorithmic terms, by the dynamics of the city. But the exhibit I loved most is what is left of Franco's boat. Franco, the dictator of Spain, had a boat. And this was it was called the Azor. It was the pleasure boat of Spanish dictator Franco, and eventually became a symbol of his power. After Franco's death, everything that was reminiscent of his fascist regime disappeared, with the exception of the Azor. Castello purchased and dismantled the ship and had it pressed into 40 blocks of scrap. In this way, he tore the Azor loose from its brutal history, but without erasing the past. And this really captured what the essence of my journey was about. Choice, glimpses, and sensing intuitively sometimes what are the dynamics that are shaping our future. And why this? Who is this? This is Adolf Hitler. The young Adolf Hitler wanted to be an artist. After he was rejected for the study program, he went further down on his luck and became homeless. What happens to people when they lose control of their lives? When their potential and ambitions are not aligned with the way they are viewed by society? Using Hitler's life as a starting point, the artist asks about a society that dismisses complete groups as unnecessary. He takes us back to a moment when the future could, when the future could go in any direction for Hitler and for the world. So this image of Hitler as the homeless, if he had remained that, the world would have been different. So in that moment, in that image, is the real, if you like, contingency, rather than determinacy of the dynamics of the transition. So it's with Hitler's spirit as the homeless man in my consciousness that I traveled to Germany. And I have participated in something rather extraordinary. It goes back a year or two to a meeting that took place, facilitated by our late Vice Chancellor, Russell Botman, who used to be a leader in the World Council of Churches. And he made friends with the leader of one of the German churches called the Evangelical Church of Westphalia. And this church was very active in the anti-apartheid movement, and now is active in the climate movement, and has taken the decision that the members of the church need to live one planet lives. That means how they live and what they do with their savings has to be consistent with the theological principle of living a sustainable life. And what's interesting about the German churches is they own their own banks, and the members of the church save their money in their own banks. And so this guy Ulrich developed the idea that maybe what the German ethical banks should be doing is setting up a global grassroots bottom-up fund where businesses and individuals can save their money knowing that it was going to be invested in renewable energy as part of their contribution to living and saving in a way which leads to the transition. And so we collaborated with Thierry in India, the Wuppertal Institute in Germany, and the Sustainability Institute in the initiative to figure out how to do this. And Paul Hendler did a lot of the work, subcontracted to the SI. And then all the researchers met in Bielefeld to now take forward the discussion. And at the meeting were representatives of the German ethical banks. And I was astounded, absolutely astounded by what I discovered. These German ethical banks, since 2007, have experienced a massive increase in the numbers of Germans who are saving their money in ethical banks. So after the financial crisis has led to the disillusionment with the traditional financial institutions, Germans are taking their money out of those banks, putting them into ethical banks. Now the problem, it's a nice problem to have. If you're a bank and you have fire hydrants of cash coming into your coffers, you have to invest that money. The problem is you can't invest it in bad stuff. You have to invest it and put the money into good stuff. So what's the good stuff? It's renewable energy. You know what their problem is? They can't find enough projects. And so they want to go beyond Germany. They want to go global. And how are they going to want to do that? They want to establish an ethical global coalition. Hence the idea of the One Climate Fund, which was launched at a rally of Christians in Bielefeld. And the choir was led by the conductor of the Libertas choir in Stellenbosch. So if you look very carefully here, there's about 1,000 people in this choir, made up of lots of choirs all around Germany. In the middle here, you'll see a bunch of South African colours. These are South African. This is the Libertas choir from Stellenbosch, as the lead choir of this choir, of this extraordinary choir that conducted by, what's his name, Johnny?
Johan de Villiers.
Sorry? Johan de Villiers. There he is. There he is. Conducting this choir. This is at night. So the people have been at the rally during the course of the day. And then those of us who had travelled, thinking we are just mere researchers, were hauled onto the stage to now talk about how we have now agreed to set up a One Climate Fund. And next to me, or one of these things, is the head of Triodos Bank, a Dutch bank with a global footprint that has been unscathed through the financial crisis, because they are real bankers. They are ethical bankers, actually. I mean, that's the same thing now. That's strange. So there's a little clip here that just captures the spirit of this. I don't know if this is going to work. Most of the rally was devoted to the challenge of refugees. The One Climate Fund launch was just a half-an-hour session. But here were a bunch of Germans who were talking about, we, as German Christians, must never allow genocide to happen again on our watch. And a boat in the Mediterranean with refugees that cannot get to Europe is genocide. Paul Hindler, who I was there with, and me, we are Jews. So here we are sitting. We are living in South Africa because our grandparents were refugees from Europe, from the violence of Europe. And here's a bunch of Christians who are saying, we don't want to live one climate lives, but we also don't want genocide to be repeated. It was an extraordinary experience. So from there I went to Lisbon, the extraordinary city of Lisbon, and participated at the University of Lisbon, this is the University of Lisbon, in this event, the 13th International Colloquium, organized by the World Academy of Arts and Science and a network of progressive heterodox economists led by a Brazilian, from the University of Brasilia. And this was our discussion, post-2008 global dynamics and structural changes. I kind of just lived through that in the lives of these bankers in Germany with fire hydrants of cash, because people have lost faith in the financial institutions and want to see their money spent in a different way. It was really extraordinary. And yeah, but now we're in a very sedate, very institutionalized, conventional academic environment. And really having quite interesting but emotionally cold, if I can put it that way, intellectual discussions about building a new economics appropriate to a new economic order. And I did a presentation on a panel. I was in a panel discussion where I talked about the African challenge, in particular the renewable energy transition in Africa, which is a key priority of the new president of the African Development Bank. And I also did a paper, first time I presented a paper that I recently published, reviewing the work of the International Resource Panel, which was set up in 2007 in the wake of the publication of the fourth assessment report of the IPCC to address the challenge of transforming the global economy and how to make it more sustainable. And it has produced an enormous body of work which hasn't really been analyzed before. And I was really saying to these heterodox economists, everything you talk about is great, but if you don't pay attention to resources, you're going to miss the boat. And heterodox economists find it difficult to think about resources. I then went to Sheffield and Coventry, and my base was at the Urban Institute. It's a new institute that's being set up at the University of Sheffield by this guy, Professor Simon Marlin. And some of you who've done Sustainable Cities module and done our program will have come across his writing. He wrote a very famous book called Splintered Urbanism, which is really about the impact of neoliberalism on the way in which the city got splintered as a result of the impact of neoliberalism from the early 1980s onwards, especially in the UK. He's now setting up this institute, and like Martin Heyer, who's setting up this Urban Future Studio at Utrecht, he's interested in exactly the same thing Martin and I are interested in, which is what is the significance of this mushrooming around the world of urban experimentation. And after listening to a talk that I presented on the work that I'm doing for the International Resource Panel to assess the resource implications of future urbanization, we put together a proposal for funding with an international network to take forward that work. This is where it's based. This is my bicycle and getting around Sheffield. This is the view from one of the places I stayed. And obviously, this was my context, which was puzzling, to put it mildly. One of the things that I discovered in Sheffield was this extraordinary housing development by a developer who has developed their own green or sustainable design standards. And these are the posters on surrounding this development in a derelict part of Sheffield, which is being gentrified, if you like, green gentrified. Innovative rainwater harvesting, efficient living, solar power, independent businesses, intelligent houses, fresh bread, houses with gardens, efficient living, friendly neighbors, low carbon, lazy Sundays, and all remotely controlled through your iPhone. So this interconnection between green, IT, brownfields redevelopment, is really interesting, and this was just part of my theme. And then thanks to Mission Flora, facilitated our partnership with the Center for Agroecology, Water and Resistance at the University of Coventry. I was invited to give a talk at the center on this topic here. So this is their mission statement: driving innovative transdisciplinary research on resilient food and water systems. The University of Coventry took a decision to allocate £6 million to this centre last year. The director, Michel Pimbert, had 10 staff 18 months ago. He's now got 80. And it's become the most well-resourced, most substantial research centre in Europe on agroecological systems. And I gave a talk there sharing our 10-year experience that has led to the formation of the CST in trying to figure out how to do transdisciplinary research in an African context. And they found it very interesting, very useful, because what we have really tried to do is especially the work of John van Badar, who's here, and I basically used a paper that he and I recently he wrote basically, I'm the second author, to where we just shared our experience in developing a new body of theory to make sense of the very simple and obvious idea that research should facilitate transformation, should facilitate transition. And that research is not about coming up with good ideas and then throwing them over the wall and hope somebody's walking past to catch them. And this is Michel Pimbert, an extraordinary man with an incredible vision. And we are signing an MOU between our two universities to take forward the partnership. At the anniversary of the second year anniversary of this institution, Kumi Naidu, a South African, former head of Greenpeace, was asked to give a talk, and this is the three of us together. I then went to, I've run out of time. What should I do?
You keep going, and then maybe we can hold questions just one-on-one afterwards. So we'll come.
Well, some of you could stay and you could just have a discussion if you need to leave. Sorry about that. I didn't. So in Burlington, I went to a Gordon Research Conference. Now, as a social scientist, I'd never heard of a Gordon Research Conference. Apparently, in the natural sciences, this is like the Premier League. This is like, if you're invited to give a talk at a Gordon conference in the natural sciences, this is like a seriously big deal. Okay? Not only was I social scientist, I'm from Africa. This is a European, North American love affair that's been going since the 1950s, started by an academic who realized that really real scientific breakthroughs only really happen if people spend time listening to each other. And so the rules, which were set in the 1950s and have never been changed, is that it's a 5-day conference. Everything is confidential. what some people now refer to as Chatham House rules, if you know what that means. Everything is confidential. You're supposed to give talks about stuff that has not been published and is exploratory. And you're not allowed to quote it, refer to it, describe it, even say it's there. And this is what the theme of this conference was. And they are a bunch of industrial ecologists. About 100 of these happen each year on all sorts of different topics. So this is an annual conference organized by industrial ecologists. Industrial ecologists are extraordinary people. They are, when it comes to the material, understanding the material world, they are the masters of the universe. They really have built the methodologies for understanding the resource flows, life cycle analysis, material flow analysis, urban mentality, all of these terms that many of you are familiar with. But they've come to the conclusion that with the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals, their discipline has been successful. Because one of the Sustainable Development Goals is sustainable consumption and production. That's their invention. But now what? Now what? Oh my God. We don't know how systems change. We don't know how they work. We better invite some social scientists. So I was the token social scientist. And I gave a keynote address where I was asked specifically to talk about global transition, governance, and the dynamics of change. And they were very polite. I think they understood much of what I said, but they'd never heard of somebody like Marina Mazzucato, who has written a book called The Entrepreneurial State, which is really an attempt to now build a new kind of economics, where you bring the state, you rebuild and bring the state back in. Even the professor of economics from the University of Massachusetts had never heard of Mazzucato. So I really love this event. 5 days. You have 40 minutes, everybody has 40 minutes to talk, 20 minutes of questions. You have 3 talks in the morning, you have a long lunch, nothing in the afternoons. 4 o'clock you then gather to see all the posters presented by the PhD students. And then you have dinner, and in the evening you have another 2 talks. Really, really creating a space for engagement. This is Burlington, Church Square, Church Street Market, the surrounding forests, lakes, an organic farm that I visited, and a Dodge Coupe. And I included this for Jeetan's sake, and the back of the room. Because when I went to the car hire company, they said, sorry, we don't have your car, but we can give you a Dodge Coupe. And I sent a picture to Jeetan and said, this is a muscle car. I've never heard of a muscle car. So, just a few more comments on 2 other events. Barcelona. I went to a meeting of the United Cities and Local Governments, which is the largest association of local governments. Ms. Edgar Peterson and I, who were at this meeting, are working with UCLG to draft their position statement for the Quito conference coming, the Habitat 3 conference taking place in Quito in October. And they are based in Barcelona, and their politics is very, very similar to the mayor of Barcelona, who is a product of the Indignados movement, who have now decided to go into government and capture the city and redirect Barcelona in a progressive direction. And the flavor of that politics infuses the secretariat of UCLG, and so they want to really push quite a radical line at Quito on behalf of the local governments of the world. And then my last stop was Venice. Beautiful, beautiful city of Venice, which is suffering as sea level rises. And I was attending an extraordinary event, which was the annual Urban Age Conference hosted by the London School of Economics. And the theme for this year was Shaping Cities. And it took place in this incredibly beautiful building, like all buildings in Venice, I suppose. And it was like this extraordinary, like all urban age conferences organized by Leslie. It's a kind of 2-day, real-time theatrical performance conducted by the director of the London School of Economics the famous Ricky Baudet. And as you can see how it's laid out, there's the fishbowl where we all sit and talk, and there's the audience, several hundred people, and it's the who's who of urbanism. This is Alejandro Aravera, a Chilean architect who is the curator of the Venice Biennale, giving a talk. And this was the iconic poster that kind of what Ricky Baudet called the centerfold. That was quite interesting. I read it, wrote an article about it. He called it urban porn, which is a deserted Chinese city, built, kind of emulating some crazy suburban American construct, and the informal settlements of Mexico City. Contrast. This was the iconic image of this event. This is the mayor of Barcelona who talked about the challenge of transforming a grassroots movement into a governance coalition, and then taking on the banks, including repossessing properties that had been taken away by the banks. This is the deputy mayor of Paris talking about reinventing Paris, and I just love the image of the campaign. Reinventing Eiffel Tower. This is an Indian architect, I've forgotten his name, very famous architect. And I gave my talk on the efficiencies of density, and I was asked to write an article about what I was going to talk about in the Guardian newspaper. And the title that they gave it was The Curse of Urban Sprawl, How Cities Grow and Why This Has to Change. And basically I played with this idea in my talk that unless we reverse the 100-year tendency towards the de-densification of our cities, we've had de-densification of our cities for 100 years. If that continues, and if the urban population doubles, as UN population statistics predict it's going to do, the total amount of land covered by cities will grow from about 1 million square kilometers today to 2.5 million square kilometers by 2050. And that extra 1.5 million square kilometers is where our most productive agricultural land lies. So there's a fundamental clash between the historic tendency towards de-densification and the sprawling out of our cities and the real threat to our food supplies for a growing population. That really was the core of what I talked about. And then I took myself through the Venice Biennale and looked at some of the projects which I don't really have time to go into. So I want to end there with my favorite pick of the last 3 months. Thank you.
We're just going to end formally there. Those who'd like to leave can take some time now. Otherwise, those who'd like to stay and have a more informal discussion with Mark and I, who'd like a last glass of wine, we'll bring the wine upstairs.
So we can take discussion now if you want to.